Hi, in this video we will talk about MySQL Firewall. Firewall helps you in protecting your MySQL database. Basically here you define a set of acceptable SQLs, and whenever any client execute a SQL, the DB verifies its syntax, and if it is all fine, the DB also verifies with the firewall to see if this is a part of the acceptable SQL. If this is a part of the acceptable SQL, the DB verifies the statement and shares the result with the user. However, if this SQL is not defined as an acceptable SQL, the SQL will not be executed, an error is returned. So let's see that in practically. So we have our DB server here. We also have our firewall on the same machine. And imagine like we have a client. So this is our client and DB server, firewall on the same machine. So the client sends a SQL to the DB server. The DB verifies its syntax. If it is fine, the DB checks with the firewall if it is an acceptable SQL. If so, the DB executes the SQL and shares the result with the user. However, if the SQL say for example the client executes another SQL, the DB verifies its syntax, checks with the firewall, and if this SQL is not part of the acceptable list, then the DB rejects this SQL. So this is the basic need for the firewall. You are basically specifying that only a specific set of SQLs can be executed on the DB server. So let's see how we can install this on the MySQL 9.3. So this is our MySQL 9.3 server. When we install the MySQL 9.3 under share and under 9.3, you will have the files required to install the MySQL Firewall service. So this is the file linux install firewall.sql. So when we run this file, it prompts you the database or the schema where you want the respective tables and other objects like the procedures where you want them to be created. And once when you run this file, additional tables and procedures will be created. So let's see them. So when we run that file, it basically creates these firewall tables: firewall whitelist, firewall users, firewall group allow list, firewall groups, firewall membership, and also these stored procedures. And it sets some parameters. We will see them. So first let's try to connect to our database. And let's see some settings. We are going to install our firewall into the MySQL database. So as of now, we don't have any tables with a name like firewall, and also we don't have any procedures with in the MySQL. And let's see if we have any variables. We don't have any global variables with the name firewall. So let's try to run this script to install the firewall. So this is the script. So we can see here it is going to create some tables: whitelist, group allow list, firewall users, firewall groups, and then it is going to create firewall membership table, and then it is going to install the plugins, 3 plugins required, and also the stored procedures to operate the firewall. So we mentioned the same here. The tables are here and the stored procedures are here. So let's try to install the firewall service into the MySQL 9.3. So I am going to run the script on the MySQL schema or the database. So now if we log in, and see, we should be able to see the tables and the procedures, and it should be even be setting the variables. Let's see them. Since we wanted everything to be installed in the MySQL database, let's verify there. Okay. We got these variables set. And let's see for the tables. Okay, it installed these tables, or it created those tables. It also created these procedures: SP firewall group dlist, nlist, firewall group rules, reload firewall rules, SP set firewall group mode, SP set firewall group mode and user, in the SP set firewall mode. Basically, we listed them here. My bad, this is about the firewall status, not about the global variables being set. To see the variables being set, so MySQL Firewall database, this is where the firewall related tables and the procedures got created. And the MySQL Firewall mode, this is to set whether your firewall is on or off. By default, it should be on. Since I was working on the same mission multiple times, I turned it off to work something else. So I will turn it on explicitly now. And the MySQL Firewall trace is also on. This is needed for something else. I will share it in a little bit. And these MySQL Firewall related tables will be cached. And in order to sync the cache from the storage, this parameter is needed. And once every specified seconds, the cache tables will be synced from the disk. So let's turn this parameter MySQL Firewall mode to on. So this parameter set persists MySQL Firewall mode is equal to on, sets the MySQL Firewall mode for the current running instance, and it also turns it on, this parameter, forever. So even if we reboot the MySQL database or the MySQL instance, this parameter will still be on. So let's check that. So now it is on. We turned off the MySQL. I started the MySQL instance. Okay, now it is active. Let's log in and see. Our interest is to see this variable. Okay, this is set to on now. So as and when we run the script, it created these tables and stored procedures, and it also automatically set the variables required for the MySQL. By default, it will be turned on. When you install MySQL Firewall, it will be turned on by default. So that is it. And let's explain a few more concepts to understand this thing better. Okay, say for example, we have 10 tables in a database schema or in a database, and 4 users: user 1, user 2, user 3 and user 4. How we grant them insert, update, delete? We can grant user 1 select access, and we can grant user 2, user 3 and user 4 select and DML access. But we cannot control, say for user 1, table 1 and table 10 are huge tables. If user 1 wants to perform a join on them, user 1 will still be able to perform because he's having the select access, but we cannot restrict it. Using firewall, you can restrict what sequels each user will be able to execute. So for that, firewall needs to store some metadata, and for that it needs to have some tables. And for each user that is associated with the firewall service, it will have an allow list. allow list is nothing but the SQLs that are acceptable for that user. So for user 1, these are the SQLs that are acceptable for user 2, user 3, and user 4. So you can define the set of SQLs that are acceptable for each one of them. So this set of SQLs needs to be stored somewhere. Also, these users can be individual users or they can be grouped. So in a different use case, we may want to say user 2 and user 3 and user 4 use the same set of SQLs. So here we group the SQLs. So any user 2 or user 3 or user 4, as long as the SQL is there in the acceptable list, it gets executed. So we need to store this metadata somewhere, and that metadata tables gets created when we run that install firewall service. And so see here, what are all the users that are registered with the firewall and what are all the groups that are registered with the firewall. For the sake of simplicity, here user 1 is a standalone user, and these 3 users we group them as one group. So the group information will be stored in the firewall groups and the whitelist. So in the case of single user or individual user, the acceptable SQLs will be stored in the whitelist, and in the case of the group, the acceptable SQLs will be stored in the firewall group allow list. Also, if you want to see who are the members for a particular group, we can make use of the firewall membership table. So going back to this thing, so now say for example user 1 has a simple statement like select star from a table, select star from actor table. Since we are making use of this Aquila database, select star from actor table. Now if this user 1 SQL is in the allow list, it verifies in the database and the database checks with the firewall. Since this SQL is already there in the allow list, it gets executed and the result is returned to the user. However, say for example, if this user does not have a SQL, this particular SQL, select star from film is one more table. If this particular SQL is not there in the allow list, and if this user executes, it comes and verifies this table, allow list table for the acceptable SQLs. Since it is not there, it gets rejected at the database. So we will see that. Okay, so apart from the individual user or single user or the group user, these are all the group users. There is also a concept of a group with a single user. So you can just create a group and then associate that group with single user. The reason is individual user accounts are getting deprecated. So MySQL recommends us to make use of the group. So the group could either consist of multiple users or it could just consist of one user. So that is the thing. So now how do we specify the SQLs in the allow list? How can we say this particular 5 SQLs needs to be added in the allow list, or particular 20 SQLs needs to be added, or particular 30 SQL needs to be added to the allow list? That we need to do. So when we register either a user or a group, we specify the modes with which these users can be registered. Say for example, these are the modes of recording, protecting, and detecting. So recording, protecting, and detecting, and off, and then reset. When we configure a user or a group with the firewall, we register that user in recording mode. So in that mode, whatever the SQLs that user is executing, that gets added to the allow list. Say for example, user 1, we are registering it with the firewall in recording mode, and if he is executing 5 SQLs, those 5 SQLs gets added to the allow list. And now when this user is switched from the recording mode to protecting mode, now this user is in protecting mode. So if this user executes any other SQL apart from these 5 SQLs, it is verified in the allow list, and since it is not there in the allow list, that SQL gets rejected. So that is the simple funda here. So the same thing applies for the group also. The groups are 2 types: single user group or multi-user group. Just for making it easy, I'm saying it like that way. When we register the group with the firewall, we specify the mode. we say it as the recording mode. So under this mode, when the users are executing the SQLs, all those SQLs gets added to the allow list in the recording mode. And when we turn that group from recording mode to protecting mode, then all the users in the group, whenever they execute any SQL, it gets verified in the allow list, and if the particular SQL is there in the allow list, it gets executed, and if the SQL is not there in the allow list, it gets rejected. So that is the thing. Coming to the detecting mode, either a individual account or a group account with multiple users or a group account with a single user, if they are executing any SQLs, all the SQLs that are executed by them gets executed fine in the detecting mode, whether they are in the allow list or whether they are not in the allow list, it gets executed. However, if it finds a SQL which is not in the allow list, then it does a thing additionally. It writes that particular SQL as a suspicious SQL in the error log. And for that to write into the error log, there are two additional parameters that we need to take care. So MySQL Firewall trace, this parameter needs to be on, and error log verbosity. By default, my mission was having it as 2, so you need to turn it to 3. We just need to be careful here. It may write so many additional messages, so we may need to keep an eye on it as well. So when those two conditions are met, that is like when the error log verbosity is set to 3 and when the MySQL Firewall trace is on, then under the detecting mode, if it finds any SQL that is not in the allow list, it gets written to the error log. So that is the thing. And the off status is like, when we turn this particular thing as off, it does not verify. The firewall does not come into picture and everything gets executed. So that's the thing. See, even when we set it to off, the allow list is still there. The allow list is still there. The number of SQLs in the allow list are still there. It doesn't get deleted. However, if you want the allow list to be empty, then you need to turn the user individual account or the group account into reset. Once we reset, their allow list is cleared out. So that is the purpose for the reset. Okay, there is one more thing. Once the firewall gets created, we can grant privileges on the firewall, like firewall admin, who needs to be able to administer the firewall, and firewall exempt. We don't want every user to be under the influence of the firewall. If that is the case, nobody will be able to execute any other statement which is not there in the allow list. So some users, we don't want them to be under the influence of the firewall. And firewall user, whichever user is configured and who wants to own their firewall rules or who wants to administer their own firewall rules, we can grant them the firewall user. And one more thing is the execute privilege on the procedures. We saw those procedures getting created. SP set firewall mode, SP reload firewall rules, SP set firewall group mode. This is for the group and this is for the individual account. And enlist, if you want to add an user to the group enlist, and group delist. If you want to take off a user from a group, then you need to run this group delist. So we see all of them in the practical, but that is about the privileges. And also we saw the statements will be written to the allow list. When a SQL statement reaches the DB and the syntax is verified, the digest form of the SQL is shared with the firewall, not the actual as is SQL, but the digest form is shared, and the digest form is verified. If it's in the allow list, it gets the SQL gets executed. So what is the digest form? Say for example, select A comma B from table T1, where column 1 is equal to 1, where column 1 is equal to 10. And the same thing, select A comma B from table 1, where column 1 is equal to 10 and where column 1 is equal to 100. These three are three different SQLs, but the digest form for each one of them will be the same. So the digest form gets stored in the MySQL allow list. Thereby you store only for a pattern one single SQL will be stored in the allow list. Now as part of the lab, let's create a few users. We will create a test user 1, test user 2, test user 3, test user 4, and also one more user, FW admin. We want to grant the firewall underscore admin privilege to this FW admin. This particular user acts as the administrator for the firewall, and we want to do the individual user testing through the test user 1, and then put the test user 2, test user 3, and test user 4 under a group called FW group, and then do the registration for this group and do the group testing for the firewall with this group. So let's get started to create the users and grant them the required privileges. So we will be creating the test user 1 and local host user, and we are granting all privileges on the Secular database or the Secular schema to the test user at local host. So let's run this. Okay, the same way for test user 2. Same thing for test user 3. And test user 4 as well. These 4 local test users can be able to connect and do anything on the Secular database. Okay, I'm creating it as FW admin 1 as local host, granting him all the privileges on the Secular database and as well as on the MySQL schema or the database, and we are granting him the firewall admin. Also, we need to grant the firewall admin to the root user. Now to test the firewall for an individual user account, I have made of 3 sessions. One as the root user. This one in blue color is the firewall admin. For the user firewall FW admin 1, we granted the firewall admin privilege, and the third one is the actual user, test user 1. So to register the user with the firewall, we need to run this command, and also we are placing it in the recording mode. So we need to run this as the firewall admin. So now this user is in the recording mode. We can verify that as well as root user to check the status. Now this user is in the recording mode. Whatever statements are getting executed while this user is in the recording mode, that gets added to his allow list. Let's execute some statements. So remember, we have given full privileges for all these users on the Secular database. So let's use Secular database and run the sample commands. We got the records, select actor ID, first name, last name from actor, where actor ID is equal to some values. And also select from actor and select from film. Now all these statements are getting recorded into his allow list. If we want to see what is there in the allow list, we can do that. But before that, let's get this user into the protecting mode. Okay, this needs to be as a test user. We are doing this thing for the test user. Now we actually move this user into the protecting mode, and if we try to execute any SQL, this SQL gets verified against the allow list. and if it's there in the allow list, it will get executed. If not, it gets rejected. Let's see that. But before that, we wanted to see what is there in the allow list. Okay, if you see, these are all the commands that we ran as the test user 1 while it is in the recording mode. So this is the digest form of that SQL. We ran for 3 actor IDs, actor ID 1, actor ID 5 and actor ID 10. If you see here, we ran it for, okay, we ran it for 1, 5 and 10, but it just stored the digest form of it, and we ran for select star from film and select star from actor. But these are the internal statements that it executed, even it wrote them into the allow list. Now that this user is in the protecting mode, test user 1 is in the protecting mode, it will allow us to run any of these SQLs only. If we try to run any SQL other than this, it should throw an error. Let's see that. Let's use Aquila database. Okay, let's use 11. Now it showed for 11. Let's use it for some other value, maybe for 17. Okay, it is able to show us. Now let's run select star from film. Okay. Yeah, we are able to fetch the result. Select star from, okay, let's try to run show tables and access some other table which is not there in the allow list. This payment is not there in the allow list. It is not an acceptable SQL for the test user 1. See, statement was blocked by firewall. So this particular thing, when we executed, it is getting verified if it is there in its allow list. Since it is not there in the allow list, it got denied. Let's try to this is also not there in its allow list. This is the allow list for test user 1. We are trying to do. Okay, so this way, for an individual account which is registered with the MySQL Firewall, the SQLs that are getting executed are verified against its allow list, and if the SQL is in the allow list, it gets executed, and if the SQL is not in the allow list, we will get an error like this statement was blocked by firewall. Okay, now as the firewall admin, let's turn this user into off status. Okay, now we turned off the firewall for this particular user. Okay, now we are able to fetch the results. Even this query is not there in the allow list, still we are able to fetch its results when we put the user into the off mode in for the firewall. But still its allow list is still there. The allow list is still there, and when we put it back into protecting mode, let's try to run the same command here. Now the statement is blocked by the firewall. So this way, using firewall, we can restrict the statements and we can protect the MySQL database. Now let's do one more exercise. if we remember this thing, we put that in recording mode, we put it in protecting mode, and we also turned off the firewall for that user. Now let's put the user into the detecting mode. When we set the user into detecting mode in the firewall, it should allow any SQL, and on top of it, if the SQL is not there in the allow list, it should write it to the error log saying that it is a suspicious SQL. So now let's put that user into the detecting mode. For that, as a firewall admin, now let's run the same command. This thing is not there in its allow list, only film and actor, the category is not there, and select star from, let's try to fetch language. This command is also not there in its allow list. Still it was able to fetch the results for us, and just let's just run the command in the allow list. Okay, oh sorry, I need to execute that as the test user, not as the root user. Okay, it was able to fetch the results. Since it is there in the detecting mode, it should write these two SQLs details into the error log. Let's check that. So our error log is here, where log MySQLD, and in another session, let's try to okay, if we see here, it just said like suspicious statement for test user one at the local host, reason no match in allow list, and it even showed the statement select star from category, and the next statement that we executed is select star from language. Since these two statements are not there in the allow list for test user one at local host, it wrote them into the error log suspicious statement, but the last one is there in the allow list, and it did not write any entry into the error log. That is about the detecting mode. Remember, we need to have the variable values set properly for it to write to our error log. These are the variable values. MySQL firewall trace must be on, and error log verbosity must be set to 3. Let's try to test the last mode. We actually did the recording, protecting, detecting, and also the off one. Let's try to reset. This should delete SQLs from the allow list, and also it should turn it off. It should turn the user off from the firewall. The command for that is sp set firewall mode username, and then the reset. Now it cleared the SQLs from the allow list. These are the SQLs that are listed in the allow list for the test user one. When we ran this reset thing, it emptied the allow list. Let's also try to see the mode for that test user one, in what mode it is there after we ran the reset. See, it turned the user into off mode, so this user is no longer registered with the firewall now. It cleared the SQLs from the allow list, and also it turned the user into off mode when we ran the sp set firewall mode to reset. Whereas when we turned it off, it just unconfigured the user from the MySQL firewall, but it did not clear the allow list. Now let's do a similar exercise for the group. We want to enroll test user 2, test user 3, test user 4 into FW group 1, and then register the group with the MySQL firewall, populate its allow list, and then do the testing. So for that, We first need to create a group and put it in recording mode, and the command for that is so this is our root. And the blue one is our firewall admin. So as the firewall admin, let's run this command. We are first recording. Now if we want to see the status of the group, group is in recording mode. Remember, we have not yet added any user into the group, so we need to add the users into the group now. And the command to add the users into the group is this thing: firewall group enlist group name followed by the user. So let's run that as the okay. Now if we see, okay, this is the same command to check the group's status. It is in recording mode. Let's run a command to see if the users are added to the group. So these three users, test user 2 at localhost, test user 3 and test user 4 at localhost, are added to firewall admin group 1. Now as each user, let's log in and run some statements so that they get added to the groups allow list. Groups allow list, we are trying to populate it by putting the group in the recording mode. So this user is not there in the group, so okay, let us open one more session for the test user 3. And one more session for the test user 4. This is for test user 2. Test user 3 and test user 4. Let's use Sakila database as we have given all privileges on this database to them. Let's run some statements so that the allow list for the group gets populated as the group is in recording state. Okay. Select star from store. Staff list. And staff. Okay. Sales by store. Okay, so as the users of the group, that is as test user 2, test user 3 and test user 4, we ran the select on the last 4 tables and we populated the groups allow list. Now let us put the group into the protecting mode. Now the command for that is call sp set firewall group mode, protecting, group name and protecting. Let's run that as okay. Now the group is in protecting mode. Let's see the allow list or the SQLs that are acceptable for this group now. Okay, these are all the SQLs that are acceptable for this. Remember, we did the select of the last few tables: store, staff list, staff, sales by store, these 4 tables. And then these are the internal commands that it made use of. So it wrote everything into the allow list. Now since that group is in protecting mode, let's run some SQL which is not in the allow list. It is rejected as test user 2. As test user 2 it is rejected since it is not there in the groups allow list. Let's try to run something which is there in its allow list. Staff list is in its allow list. It is able to select. Let's try to select something else which is not there in the allow list. Actor is not there in its allow list, so it is blocked by the firewall. So anything that is executed is verified against the allow list, and if it is there in the groups allow list, it is executed, and if it is not there in the groups allow list, it is rejected. So this is all done while the group is in protecting mode. Now let's turn the group into detecting mode. From this diagram, we understand that if any resource is in detecting mode, irrespective of the SQL is there in the allow list or not, it should be executed. And on top of it, if the SQL is there in the allow list, it won't write anything to the error log. But if the SQL is not there in the allow list, it should write an entry saying a suspicious SQL found for a particular group or user into the error log. Let's see that. Now this thing previously was blocked by the firewall. Now we are in the detecting mode. You can verify that. We are in the detecting mode for the entire group, and as a member of the group, let's run the statement. Now we got the result. As another user, let's run the same statement. We were able to fetch the result. Now let's check the error log. See here, now it says suspicious statement, test user 3, reason no match in allow list. Statement, this is the statement: select actor ID, first name, last name from actor, where actor ID is equal to, and the same thing with a different value we executed as test user 4. So now while the group is in detecting mode, it did not block any statement. Even though the statement is not there in its allow list, it executed, but it just wrote an entry into the error log. And if we want to unenroll this group from the firewall, we just need to turn the mode to off for the entire group. Now just check the status of the group. It is in off mode. it will be able to fetch anything, but it won't write anything to the error log. Okay, let's just check the error log. It didn't write anything. This is the same statements which were there from the past. So that is about the group. We just tested the group. We put the group into recording mode and populated its allow list, or the SQLs that should be allowed for this group, and we turned the group into protecting mode. And when we turned it into protecting mode, it did not allow us to execute any SQL which is not there in its allow list. And we put the group into detecting mode. It allowed us to execute everything, but if the SQL is not there in the allow list, it just wrote into the error log. And when the group is unenrolled from the firewall, it was able to execute, or the members of the group were able to execute any statement, and did not write anything to the error log. So that is about the testing of a group with the firewall. Okay, if you want to delist, or if you want to take off any user from a group, you can run this command. So this command takes off the user, test user 4 from the FW group 1. So that way you can add users, or you can take off the users. And in this example, we populated the allow list from each user. However, if we want to populate the groups allow list by a particular user only, then we can make use of this procedure sp set firewall group mode and user. We specify the group name, the mode, and then the username. When we run this thing, whatever SQLs are run by test user 3 while the group is in recording mode only gets added to the allow list. There is one more thing we want to discuss. We wanted to see the status of the firewall. So this is the global status for the firewall. So far the firewall has denied access for 6 SQL statements, and it has granted access for 17 SQL statements. It has mentioned that 4 suspicious statements were found when the corresponding user or the corresponding group was in the detecting mode, and the firewall has cached about 9 SQLs. In either the individual or the groups allow list, it knows about 9 SQLs. So this is one thing that is useful. And that completes our video. Thank you for watching.